I had been dreaming of a quiet, relaxing getaway for months. The grind of everyday life had worn me down, and all I wanted was a few days to escape into nature, away from the constant noise of the city. I found the perfect place on Airbnb, a cozy cabin by a lake, secluded enough for peace and quiet, but not too far from civilization in case I needed anything. The photos were inviting. Warm wood interiors, big windows overlooking the water, a stone fireplace, and the reviews were glowing. Every guest had loved their stay, praising the serenity, the comfortable atmosphere, and the helpfulness of the host. Sounded perfect. When I arrived, the host, a woman in her late 40s, greeted me with a smile. She was kind, welcoming, and eager to show me around. The cabin was just as it had looked in the photos. Charming, rustic, and everything I'd hoped for. She gave me a brief tour, pointing out the amenities, the kitchen, the living room, the lofted bedroom, and the bathroom. She told me it was an old family vacation spot, but that they no longer used it since the kids had grown up and moved away. I didn't think much of it at the time, just nodded and thanked her. "Feel free to make yourself at home," she said, her tone light. "Everything you need is here. I'll leave you to it. Enjoy your stay." She left and I was alone. The silence of the woods was calming, a stark contrast to the city noise I was used to. The air smelled fresh, and the view from the porch was incredible. The lake stretched out before me, still and glassy, reflecting the darkening sky. I unpacked my things, settling into the cabin. Couldn't wait to relax. But as I started going through the drawers and cabinets to put things away, I noticed something strange. The drawers weren't empty like they usually are in Airbnb rentals. There were clothes in one of them, old, faded shirts and jackets. In another, I found some books, their spines cracked and well-worn. I figured the owner must have left some of their stuff behind, but it felt odd, a little too personal. It wasn't just random things. It was like someone had actually lived here recently. I brushed it off, assuming maybe the owner hadn't fully cleared out. People leave things behind sometimes, right? But then, when I opened a drawer in the kitchen to put away my utensils, I found something even stranger. A few photographs. Old black and white pictures, yellowing at the edges. They were all of the cabin. Its exterior, the lake, the forest around it, and some included people, though their faces were blurred with time. The strangest part was that the photos didn't look like they were from decades ago. Some seemed recent, within the last 5 or 10 years. I decided to ask the host about it. When I sent her a message, she replied quickly. "Oh, those? It used to be our family's place. We spent a lot of time here when the kids were young, but we don't come up anymore. We moved on, you know? Too many memories. We just rent it out now when we're not here." It made sense, I thought, but something about her response felt off. There was no sadness in her tone, no nostalgia, just indifference. It felt like she was brushing it aside, and I didn't know why that bothered me so much. But again, I didn't think much of it. I had the cabin to myself for the next 3 days, and that was all that mattered. The second night was when things started to feel strange. It had been a peaceful evening. I made myself dinner, sat by the fire, and read for a while. But around 10:30 p.m., I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't loud, more like a soft tap. Tap, tap. I froze for a moment, wondering if it was the host returning for some reason. I hadn't expected any visitors, but maybe she needed to drop something off. I walked over to the door and opened it. There was no one standing there. I stepped outside, looking around, but the only thing I saw was the lake, calm under the moonlight, and the dark forest surrounding the cabin. Nothing. Then, I noticed a small package sitting on the doorstep. It was wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. No note, nothing to indicate where it had come from. I picked it up, feeling a strange unease settle in my stomach. I glanced around again, but still, no one was in sight. I took the package inside and set it down on the table. My heart was beating faster now. I ripped open the paper, and inside, there was a single note, written in a scrawl that looked almost frantic. It read, "I hope you're enjoying the cabin. Your next surprise is under the floorboards." I stared at the note for what felt like an eternity, the blood draining from my face. Took me a second to process what it said. Under the floorboards? What did that even mean? I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. My mind raced, thinking of every possible explanation. A joke? A prank? But who would leave a note like that? And why? I stood there for a long time, just holding the note in my trembling hands. I didn't want to go digging under the floorboards, whatever that was meant to imply, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was nothing. But then why would someone leave me that note? It didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a warning. I paced back and forth, unsure of what to do. It was so quiet in the cabin, too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're not alone, even when you are. I tried calling the host, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I sent her a message, but there was no response. I couldn't help but feel that something was wrong, that I was being watched. But by who? The night dragged on. I stayed in the living room, the lights on, the door bolted shut. I watched the windows, half expecting to see someone standing out there in the dark. Every noise made me jump, the wind outside scraping branches against the cabin. Couldn't sleep. I just kept staring at the door, waiting for someone to knock again. But no one did. By morning, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed. I didn't want to stay another night. I packed my things quickly, moving through the cabin as fast as I could. I thought maybe it had all been my imagination. Maybe I was just tired and paranoid, but as I looked around one last time, something felt wrong. The cabin, with all its strange little details, suddenly felt too much like a place I didn't belong. The feeling of being watched, the note, the odd things in the drawers, it was all too much. I grabbed my bag, left the cabin, and drove back into town. I kept trying to call the host, but there was still no answer. As I drove away, I glanced back at the cabin, nestled by the lake, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden in there, something that had been waiting for me. I don't know if I'll ever find out what was under those floorboards, but I know one thing for sure. I'll never stay in another Airbnb again. I had never been to this city before, but the trip seemed like a perfect opportunity to check out the downtown area. I was going for a short business trip, a couple of days at most, so I didn't need a fancy place, just something clean, comfortable, and convenient. I always liked staying in Airbnbs for the privacy they offered compared to hotels. After searching for a while, I found a place that seemed like the perfect match. A modern, stylish loft located in the heart of the downtown area. The photos on the listing were absolutely stunning, showing off sleek, minimalistic furniture. Lots of light pouring in through large windows and polished concrete floors. The apartment looked new, and the location couldn't have been better. Right near all the places I needed to be for my meetings. I quickly booked it. The host, a woman named Emma, was prompt and polite in her responses. She gave me all the details I needed for check-in and made sure to let me know that if I needed anything, I could reach out. Her tone was friendly, but she came off as just a little distant, like someone who wasn't overly eager to engage. Still, I figured it was just a personality thing and didn't think too much of it. When I arrived at the apartment, I was impressed by how well it matched the photos. It looked exactly like the listing, maybe even better in person. The place was spotless, and everything had that crisp, new feeling to it. The decor was sleek, with minimalist furniture and a neutral color palette. There was a large sectional couch, a coffee table, and a flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. The kitchen had stainless steel appliances and marble countertops, and the bathroom was high-end, with a deep soaking tub and walk-in shower. The place was clearly designed with style in mind. I was relieved to see how well the place met my expectations, especially since I had heard horror stories about other people's Airbnb experiences. I thought to myself, this is going to be a great trip. The first night was uneventful. After a long day of meetings, I took a shower, ordered some food, and settled in to watch a show on the couch. The apartment felt quiet, peaceful, and private, just what I needed after a hectic day. The bed was comfortable, and I fell asleep quickly, the city lights faintly flickering through the windows. But as I was getting ready for bed, something caught my eye. I had just finished brushing my teeth when I glanced up at the corner of the room above the couch. There, in the ceiling, was a small black dot. It was maybe the size of a dime, positioned just above the corner. At first, I thought it was just a sensor or maybe some sort of light fixture. But as I stared at it for a few moments, I started to feel a little uneasy. I didn't know why, but there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. I tried to shake it off. It was probably nothing. I mean, the apartment looked brand new, and everything else seemed perfect. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about that dot. I tried to distract myself, reading a book for a while, but every time I looked over at the corner, my mind kept going back to it. I told myself it was nothing, a sensor or maybe a little dust or a strange light reflection. There was no reason to think anything weird was going on. But then, as I was lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling, I felt a sudden surge of paranoia. It was as if the longer I stayed in that room, the more I was convinced that there was something off about it. I had this nagging feeling that I needed to check the other corners of the apartment. I don't know why. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but I couldn't ignore it. So, I got up and began scanning the room. First, I checked the other corners of the living room. Nothing unusual. The lights were all in their proper places, and the walls seemed completely normal. But then, I walked into the kitchen and noticed something strange by the light fixture. There, in the corner of the room, near the ceiling, was another black dot. Smaller than the first one, but definitely visible. My stomach dropped. Now I was really starting to feel sick. I wasn't sure what I was looking at, but I knew it wasn't normal. My mind immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario, hidden cameras. I quickly looked around the rest of the apartment, but I didn't see anything else obvious. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I grabbed my phone and texted the host, asking if there was any sort of security system in the apartment, or if the small dots were part of a sensor setup. I wasn't sure how to phrase it without sounding paranoid, but I tried to keep it casual, not wanting to make it seem like I was accusing her of anything. There was no reply. At that point, my paranoia began to grow, and I started to wonder if I had missed something. I remembered the listing pictures showing a well-designed apartment, but I hadn't really paid attention to details like light fixtures or sensors. I needed to check the lamps next. I went to the lamps on either side of the couch and examined them closely. Sure enough, in the base of one of the lamps, hidden under a thin layer of fabric, was another small black dot, just like the others. My heart started to race. I went to the other lamp in the room and checked it as well. Another black dot, carefully hidden in the base. That was 3, and by now I was certain they weren't just sensors or lights. They were cameras, hidden cameras, discreetly placed throughout the apartment. My mind was spinning. Why? What kind of person would do this? I felt like I was going to be sick. I had to get out of there, but I didn't want to touch anything or disturb the setup in case the cameras were still rolling. I packed my things quickly, shoving everything into my bag without thinking. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. I was desperate to get out of there as fast as possible. I tried calling the host again, but she still didn't respond. That's when I realized how bad the situation really was. The host had been so distant in her communications with me, and now I couldn't reach her at all. I sent a message through the AIRBNB app, explaining that I was leaving because I had found hidden cameras in the apartment and needed to report the incident. There was still no response. I didn't know what to do. I was freaked out and just wanted to get as far away from that apartment as possible. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the door, locking it behind me. I made my way to the nearest coffee shop, shaking with anxiety, trying to collect my thoughts. I didn't know what had just happened, but I felt completely violated. When I finally got back to my hotel room, I reported the incident to Airbnb, detailing everything I had found. The hidden cameras, the strange dots in the corners of the room, and the lack of communication from the host. I even sent them photos of the cameras that I had taken before leaving. They responded a few hours later, but their reply was less than helpful. They thanked me for reporting the issue and assured me that they would look into it, but they didn't seem to take the matter as seriously as I hoped. They offered me a refund for the nights I hadn't stayed, but nothing was done to address the cameras or the potential invasion of privacy. I felt utterly helpless. The situation left me on edge for the rest of my trip. I kept thinking about how close I had been to staying another night in that place, how easy it would have been for someone to have watched me without my knowledge. I couldn't believe I had walked into that apartment thinking it was a safe, normal place to stay. In the end, I cut my trip short and went home early. The whole experience left me shaken, and I haven't used Airbnb since. I've heard that hidden cameras in rentals aren't as rare as you'd think, but I never thought it would happen to me. It was a wake-up call, and I learned to trust my instincts a lot more after that. The whole thing still bothers me, but at least I got out before anything worse could happen. I booked the cabin in the mountains on a whim. After a few hectic months of city life, constant noise, endless meetings, the grind, I needed something different, something quiet. So when I came across the listing, I jumped at it. The photos showed a small, rustic cabin tucked away in the woods, far from civilization, perfect for some peace and solitude. The host seemed friendly enough when I communicated with her online. She was quick to reply to my messages, eager to ensure I'd have everything I needed for my stay. She assured me that the cabin was well kept and fully stocked. I appreciated her promptness, but there was a small part of me that wondered if she was trying a bit too hard to be accommodating. But I brushed it off. Everyone has their own way of making guests feel welcome, right? I arrived in the late afternoon. The air was crisp and cool, the smell of pine trees filling my lungs as I drove up the narrow, winding road. The journey was beautiful, but the isolation of the place began to settle in. There weren't any other homes in sight, and the trees seemed to close in around me as I made my way to the cabin. It was far from anything, no cell service, no signs of civilization. The cabin itself was small but charming. It had a worn wooden exterior, a front porch with a couple of rocking chairs, and tall, narrow windows. The kind of place you'd imagine reading books and drinking tea by a fire. The host, a woman in her late 30s, greeted me with a warm smile and a firm handshake. "Welcome," she said, her voice a little too cheerful. "Let me show you around." I followed her inside, trying not to feel awkward. The inside was cozy but smelled faintly of dust, as if it had been closed up for a while. There were wooden beams overhead and a large stone fireplace in the corner of the living room. It had that rustic, log cabin vibe that looked nice in pictures but felt colder in person. The kind of place that might have been inviting a century ago, but now seemed off. As she gave me the tour, I noticed she was a bit too eager. Her explanations about the amenities were rushed, almost as if she were checking off a list in her mind. She made sure to mention that everything was up to date, that there was a well outside for water, and that the wood stove in the kitchen worked great for cooking. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me more than I was watching her, like she was assessing whether I was the right kind of guest for her cabin. The tour ended quickly, and she left after a few more quick words. "If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to text me," she said, her smile still wide, but there was something hollow about it. I locked the door behind her and took a deep breath. It was quiet, too quiet, but I figured I'd settle in and try to enjoy the peace. I unpacked my bag, grabbed a book, and made myself some tea. The fire crackled in the hearth, and I let the warmth of the room settle over me. It wasn't perfect, but it was quiet. That's all I really needed. The evening came and went without incident, but something kept nagging at the back of my mind. It was like I was being watched, though I couldn't pinpoint why. The silence was so complete that every small noise, every creak of the wood, every gust of wind outside seemed amplified. Around 9:30 p.m., I was reading on the couch when I heard a knock at the door. It was a soft, polite knock, nothing alarming, but it made my heart race. I wasn't expecting anyone. The host had told me she wouldn't check in on me during the stay unless I reached out for help. I stood up and walked to the door, unsure of what to expect. Maybe it was the host again. Maybe she'd forgotten something, or maybe I needed to sign a form or something small like that. I opened the door, but there was no one there. Just the night air, still and cool, sweeping into the cabin. But then I saw it. A small basket was sitting on the doorstep, with fruits and snacks piled neatly inside. There was a small handwritten note attached. "Enjoy your stay." Felt odd. Who would leave a gift like this without saying a word? I bent down, picked up the basket, and examined it. It wasn't exactly a gift I would have expected from a host. It wasn't welcoming, it was invasive somehow. But I pushed the feeling aside. Maybe she just wanted to be kind. It was strange, sure, but not alarming enough to make a big deal about. Still, I locked the door again before sitting back down with the basket in hand. The fruit was fresh, at least, but I felt uneasy as I ate a couple of grapes. That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't the cold. The fire had kept the place warm enough. It wasn't the bed, it was comfortable, though nothing special. But something about the cabin, the isolation, the quiet was starting to get to me. My mind kept wandering back to the knock on the door and the weird basket. Was someone watching me? Or was I just overthinking things? I finally dozed off, but I woke up in the middle of the night with a start. I couldn't explain it, just a gut feeling that something was wrong. The house was still silent, but there was something about the silence that felt unnatural. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I got up groggily, the lingering sense of unease still weighing on me. As I grabbed my coffee, I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before, a mark on the doorframe just next to the lock. A faint smear, almost like a fingerprint, but too smudged to make out clearly. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. Had I missed it when I locked the door? Maybe I had. Or maybe it had been left there after I closed the door last night. But the thought of someone being inside while I was sleeping, of someone coming in without my knowing, was unsettling. I texted the host. "Hey, quick question. I noticed a mark on the doorframe. Is that normal? Just wanted to double check." She responded almost immediately, far too quickly for my liking. "Oh, that's probably from the door settling. Don't worry, it happens all the time. Everything is fine." Her response didn't help. In fact, it made me feel worse. Why was she so quick to dismiss it? I didn't know, but I couldn't shake the thought that something was off. The mark didn't look like it was from the door settling. It looked like someone had touched the frame, or maybe even had been inside. I spent the rest of the day trying to calm my nerves. I went for a hike in the woods around the cabin, though the trail was mostly overgrown and barely marked. It helped take my mind off things, but the quiet of the forest only seemed to amplify the sense of isolation. It felt like the trees were closing in, like I was being watched from every angle. But it wasn't until I returned to the cabin that the real unease set in. As I stood in front of the bathroom mirror later that evening, brushing my teeth, I saw something. A faint, dark silhouette behind me, just barely visible in the reflection. It was the outline of a person, too solid to be a trick of the light, but too faint to make out any details. I froze. I turned quickly, but the bathroom was empty. The door was still closed, the room still and quiet. My breath came in short, quick gasps as I scanned every corner of the room. Nothing, but I couldn't ignore what I saw. It had been there, right behind me, just standing there. I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck, my skin prickling with fear. Had someone come in while I wasn't paying attention? Had the host been right all along, and I was just overreacting? I couldn't stay in that cabin any longer. I grabbed my things and ran out of the bathroom, heart pounding. I didn't even bother checking the rest of the cabin. I threw my bag into my car, locked the door behind me, and drove away without looking back. The road out of the mountains felt longer than I remembered, and the sun was setting as I made my way down the winding road, the cabin disappearing behind me. When I got home, I texted the host one last time. "I'm checking out early. Something doesn't feel right about the cabin." She didn't respond. I had been driving for hours, winding through back roads and small towns, all the while pushing myself to make it to the next destination. It was supposed to be a quick, peaceful trip to clear my mind, but after the 4th or 5th hour of nothing but fields and trees passing by, I realized I needed a place to sleep. It was too late to be looking for hotels or motels, and I wasn't about to try my luck with roadside rest stops. That's when I pulled up the Airbnb app. I didn't expect to find anything that was too far off the beaten path. But then, there it was. A listing for an old Victorian house, nestled in a small town I had never heard of. It looked like it could have been in one of those old black and white photographs from a century ago, with tall windows and a porch that wrapped around the front. The price was ridiculously low for what it promised. Renovated but kept its historic charm, it said, which made me pause for a moment. Sure, it sounded a little like a pitch someone would give to make an old house sound nice, but after all the driving, it felt like fate. I quickly reserved it. The description said the host wasn't around, but they had left the key under the mat and the house was open for guests. Perfect. I just needed a bed. When I arrived, the house immediately felt off. Not in a way that screamed dangerous or abandoned, but more in a subtle, uncanny way. The air was cool, unnaturally cold for a summer night. The temperature outside was close to 80 degrees, but inside the house, it felt like a draft was coming through the walls. The place had an old charm to it, all right? The floors creaked under my feet. The walls were lined with wallpaper that looked like it had seen better days, and the furniture seemed like it hadn't been updated since the early 1900s. Still, it had been well maintained, and there was an eerie quietness to it, as if it was waiting for something to happen. I didn't give it much thought, though. It was late and I was tired. I grabbed the key from under the mat, let myself in, and started to look around. The house was bigger than it seemed from the outside, with long hallways and rooms that stretched into the back like some kind of labyrinth. There was a faint smell of dust and old wood in the air, but nothing too alarming. I found my room at the back of the house, right next to a set of large windows that looked out into the backyard. I could tell that, in its prime, this house had been a beauty: high ceilings, intricate woodwork, and grand furniture that looked more like it belonged in a museum than someone's living room. But now it felt more like a relic of the past, a time capsule frozen in time. The bed was comfortable enough, and the blankets smelled like they had been washed recently. I undressed, took a quick shower, and finally climbed into bed. It didn't take long for me to drift off to sleep, exhaustion taking over. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up, disoriented and unsure of why I had stirred. At first, I thought it was just the noise of the house settling. The wooden beams creaked, and the old floorboards groaned under their own weight. But then, I heard something else. Footsteps. At first, they were faint, like someone walking down a long hallway upstairs. Maybe it was the house settling again, I thought. But then, the steps came closer. Slow and deliberate, like someone was walking from one end of the house to the other. My heart started to beat faster. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was the house's age, or the wind pushing on the windows, making things sound strange. But then the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I could hear the soft shuffling, followed by the unmistakable sound of the doorknob turning, just slightly, as though someone was testing it. I froze, my mind racing. I had locked the door when I came in. There was no reason for anyone to be outside it. I could feel my breath quickening as I lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling in the dark. The handle jiggled, like someone was trying to force it open. I could hear the scraping sound of it being turned in the dark, but the lock held. I wasn't imagining it. My pulse raced, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I wasn't alone in the house, but who could it be? The host was supposed to be away, and I had been given clear instructions to make myself comfortable. I pulled the covers up over my head, not sure what else to do. The footsteps outside my door continued, pacing back and forth, as if someone was waiting for me to do something, anything. I stayed as still as I could, listening to the soft tap of feet against the floor. The sounds dragged on for what felt like an eternity, but eventually, they faded. Just like that, gone. I didn't move at first. I was too terrified to even blink, as if any movement would draw attention to my presence. I waited in the dark for what seemed like an age, my mind spinning with all the possibilities. I couldn't explain it. There was no way I was imagining this, but I also couldn't see any logical reason for someone to be in the house. Eventually, I gathered enough courage to get up and check the lock. Everything was fine. No one had come in, but I was too unsettled to go back to sleep right away. I sat up in bed, listening for any other sounds, my nerves on edge. The next morning, after a restless night, I woke up groggily to the soft light of dawn streaming through the curtains. I hadn't slept much, but I was too drained to worry about it now. My mind was still racing, trying to make sense of what had happened during the night. The footsteps, the doorknob. When I checked my phone, there was a message from the host, sent while I was asleep. Hope you slept well. My mother always liked to wander the halls at night. She passed away in the 1920s, but she's harmless. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to comprehend what I had just read. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of the words. It wasn't a joke. There was no indication that the host was trying to make light of the situation. The message felt like it had been written with a sort of strange calmness, as if it were an everyday occurrence. The text mentioned their mother, but what really stuck with me was the line about her passing away in the 1920s. Was it really her I had heard? Or was it something else? Some memory of her that hadn't quite left the house? I didn't know, but I also didn't feel like I needed to figure it out. The coldness in the house, the footsteps, the door handle, all of it suddenly felt too real to ignore. The house, despite its beautiful exterior and charm, held something that lingered far beyond what could be explained by a draft or the settling of old wood. After seeing the message, I packed my things quickly. I didn't feel the need to stay any longer. I didn't bother leaving a note or sending a message back. The place had given me what I needed, a bed for the night, but I wasn't sticking around to dig deeper into whatever was still roaming the halls of that Victorian house. As I drove away, I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone watching me. But there was nothing, just the empty stretch of road behind me. Still, the unease lingered. I had been dreaming of a quiet, peaceful getaway for weeks. My usual routine was hectic: work, social obligations, errands. Everything was a constant rush. So, when I stumbled upon this quaint little cottage on Airbnb, tucked away in the countryside, I thought it would be the perfect escape. The listing boasted of a rustic charm, nestled among tall trees and away from the noise of city life. The perfect spot to recharge, to be alone with my thoughts and the serene surroundings. The photos on the website were beautiful wooden beams, a cozy fireplace, a small kitchen, and large windows offering views of nothing but nature. The reviews were glowing. Everyone who stayed there had nothing but praise for the host, an older man named Arthur, who had apparently gone out of his way to make his guests feel welcome. A lovely, kind soul, one review called him. The perfect host, said another. I was sold immediately. I messaged Arthur, asking if the cottage was available for the weekend. He responded quickly with a warm tone and assured me it was free. We set up the dates and I made the reservation. The drive there was longer than I expected, winding down narrow roads lined with thick trees. The GPS was starting to get glitchy as I approached the cottage, and I realized I hadn't seen another car in over half an hour. It felt strangely isolated, but I welcomed the solitude. I had no expectations beyond peace and quiet. When I pulled up to the cottage, it looked exactly like the photos. Charming, isolated, and inviting. Arthur was standing on the porch, waving, a big smile on his face. He looked just like I imagined from his picture. Gray hair, a slightly weathered face, and kind eyes. He greeted me warmly and showed me inside. The cottage was as quaint as advertised, filled with vintage furniture and an inviting atmosphere. I felt an immediate sense of relief as I stepped inside. It smelled like wood and lavender, a perfect blend of calm. Arthur went over the basics, pointing out the nearest town, where I could buy supplies if needed, and gave me his number in case anything went wrong. I'm right down the road if you need anything at all, he said, his voice soft but insistent. You let me know, okay? I smiled and assured him I'd be fine. After all, I wasn't here for company. I was here to be alone. He nodded, still smiling, and then left. I locked the door behind him. For the first few hours, everything was perfect. The sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow over the forest outside. I opened a bottle of wine I'd brought with me and sat by the window, watching the birds fly in the fading light. The stillness of the place was so different from the usual hum of life back home. It was exactly what I needed. But then, as night began to settle in, I heard the first knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it startled me. I walked to the door cautiously, peering through the small window next to it. Arthur was standing there, holding a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Just wanted to bring you a little something," he said with his usual smile when I opened the door. "Homemade muffins. I thought you might like them." I was taken aback but smiled politely. "Thanks, Arthur. That's really kind of you." He handed me the package and lingered a moment, as if waiting for something. I awkwardly shifted the bundle in my hands, unsure of what else to say. He eventually nodded and turned to leave. "Have a nice evening," he called over his shoulder. I closed the door and stood there for a moment, staring at the muffins in my hands. It was an odd gesture. At first, I thought it was just a sweet and harmless act, but something about it felt a little too eager. I shrugged it off and set the muffins on the kitchen counter, deciding to enjoy them later. The rest of the evening was uneventful. I settled in, opened a book, and tried to relax. But it was hard to shake the feeling that I wasn't truly alone here. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being paranoid. The next day, I went for a long walk in the woods behind the cottage. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine filled my lungs. I wandered aimlessly for hours, enjoying the peaceful isolation. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves or the call of distant birds. It was exactly what I had hoped for. When I returned to the cottage, I noticed something strange. The door, which I had locked before I left, was slightly ajar. My heart skipped a beat. I was sure I had locked it before I left. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, wondering if I had just forgotten. But something didn't sit right. I pushed the door open the rest of the way and stepped inside. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of unease lingered. I checked all the windows, locked. Everything seemed fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe I had just forgotten to lock it, but the thought didn't make sense. Why was the door ajar, and why did it feel like someone had been here? That evening, there was another knock. I opened the door, and this time Arthur was holding a small bag of herbs. "I thought you might like some fresh lavender for the cottage," he said, his voice almost too cheerful. "It'll help you relax. You're here to unwind, right?" I took the bag from him, forcing a smile. "Thanks. That's really thoughtful." He didn't leave right away. He stood there for a moment, his eyes scanning the space behind me. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was lingering a little too long. Finally, he nodded, gave me another one of those wide smiles, and left. This time, I didn't even bother closing the door behind him before locking it. I checked the windows again, double-checking that everything was secure. It was probably nothing, just an overly attentive host. But something about the way Arthur kept showing up, bringing small gifts, and always seeming to know exactly what I was doing unsettled me. That night, I locked the door and made a note to myself to ask Arthur to respect my privacy. I wasn't here for constant check-ins or gifts. I wanted to be left alone. The next day, I decided to go for another long walk, this time in the opposite direction. I hoped the fresh air would clear my mind and help me shake off the anxiety that had started to creep in. But the walk didn't help. It only made things worse. When I returned, the door was once again ajar. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, trying to make sense of it. This time, I didn't even go inside. I walked around the cottage, checking the windows again. Everything was as it should be, except for one thing. The front window, the one facing the road, had a small crack in the corner. I was sure it hadn't been there before. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what to make of it, but my heart was pounding now, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I went inside, locked the door, and tried to distract myself by watching a movie on my laptop. But the unease never left. That night, I left a note on the door. I wasn't going to be around much, but I wanted to make it clear that I needed privacy. No more unexpected visits. I wasn't rude in the note, but I made it firm. I hoped Arthur would understand. When I went for a walk in the forest that evening, I felt a little better. It was a long walk, and I tried to clear my mind, to focus on the sound of the wind in the trees and the birds overhead. But when I returned to the cottage, I saw something that made my stomach turn. The door was locked, just like I had left it. But inside, everything was as I'd left it, except for one thing. A picture of me, taken from the front window while I was walking. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the photo. It was a clear shot of me walking along the forest path, looking down at the ground. I had no idea when the picture had been taken, but it was unmistakably me. My heart started racing, and I felt my skin crawl. I turned to look out the front window, but it was dark outside now, and the forest was nothing but shadows. I backed away from the door slowly, my mind spinning. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stay here anymore. I wasn't sure if Arthur had been in the cottage while I was gone, or if he had been watching me from outside. But the thought of it made me sick. I grabbed my things, packed my bags, and left as quickly as I could. I didn't even stop to look back. As I drove away from the cottage, I couldn't help but feel a strange relief. The peaceful retreat I had hoped for had turned into something much darker. I never contacted Arthur again. The cottage was listed on Airbnb the next month, but I never checked to see if it was still available. Some things I decided were better left alone. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been watching me the whole time. I would never know for sure, but I didn't need to. Some places weren't meant for relaxation. They were meant to be left behind. I had been looking forward to this weekend getaway for months. I needed a break from work, the city, everything. The stress had been piling up, and I was desperate for some peace and quiet. I found the perfect spot, a cozy little apartment in a small town just a couple of hours outside the city. It was everything I wanted. Private, secluded, and in a quiet area with lots of nature around. The listing described it as a lovely one-bedroom apartment, with a small living room, a kitchen, and a beautiful bedroom that seemed perfect for a relaxing weekend. The pictures were charming, showing soft lighting, comfortable furniture, and a welcoming atmosphere. I booked it immediately. When I arrived, the host greeted me with a warm smile. She seemed friendly enough, mid-40s, wearing a casual dress with a floral print. She gave me the keys, told me a little bit about the area, and offered to give me a quick tour of the apartment. The place seemed great, everything neat and tidy, just as it looked in the pictures. The living room had a cozy couch, a small coffee table, and a bookshelf with a few books scattered on it. The kitchen was compact but fully equipped, with a cute little dining table in the corner. The bathroom was spotless, and the bedroom, well, that's where things got a little strange. The bedroom was just as charming as everything else. A large bed with a soft quilt, a wooden dresser, and a set of windows that looked out over a quiet street. But in the corner, behind the dresser, there was a door, a small wooden door. It didn't seem to lead anywhere. It looked like it was meant to be a closet or maybe just storage space. The host explained it was a storage room, nothing special, and it wasn't in use. She casually told me that if I needed anything extra, I could ask, but not to worry about the door. It was just there, she said, nothing to think about. I didn't think much of it. I was tired from the drive and more than happy to settle in. I unpacked my bag, made a quick snack, and settled on the couch with a book. The evening passed quietly, the sun setting behind the trees outside. I started to relax, my mind unwinding for the first time in weeks. That night, I slept well at first. The bed was incredibly comfortable, the kind of bed you just sink into, and the apartment was so quiet it felt almost like I was the only person in the world. But around 2 a.m., I woke up to a strange sound. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but then it came again. A loud bang, like something heavy had fallen. My eyes shot open, and I sat up, listening intently. The sound came again, followed by what sounded like scraping, like furniture being moved. My heart started to race. I turned to look at the corner of the room where the small door was. The noise seemed to be coming from that direction. It was definitely too loud to be the wind or a small animal. No, this was something more. Something or someone was behind that door. I froze, not knowing what to do. My phone was on the nightstand next to me. I grabbed it and quickly texted the host, but I didn't get a reply. I tried calling, but there was no answer. The banging stopped as suddenly as it had started, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I lay there in the dark, staring at the door, my mind racing with thoughts. Maybe it was just a neighbor? Maybe someone had broken into the building and was messing around? But then I heard something else, something that made my blood run cold. Breathing, soft, slow, deliberate breathing. It was coming from behind the door. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, unsure of whether I should leave or stay. My phone lit up, but it was just the time, 2:15 a.m. I looked around the room again, my senses on high alert. The only sound now was my own breathing, too loud in the silence. The door was still, but I could swear I saw a faint shadow moving under it. I couldn't take it anymore. My mind was spinning, trying to piece together what was happening. I didn't care anymore about the rest of the weekend. I grabbed my bag, threw on my shoes, and dashed out of the apartment. I didn't even stop to turn off the lights. I just ran. I locked the door behind me, standing in the hallway, trying to calm my racing heart. The apartment building was dark, and the hallway felt unnaturally quiet. I couldn't help but feel that something was watching me, even though I was alone. I took the stairs down to the front door, and as I reached for the handle, I thought I heard something, a faint rustling sound from above me. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't dare look back. I pushed the door open and rushed out into the cool night air. I felt safe outside, but at the same time, everything felt wrong. Like I had just escaped something, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I drove around the small town for a while, trying to clear my head. It was late and everything was still. My mind kept drifting back to the apartment. The noise, the breathing, the door. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I didn't know, something hidden. I found a small hotel nearby and booked a room. I didn't care that it was late and I was exhausted. I just needed to be somewhere else, anywhere else. The hotel was nothing fancy, but it was quiet. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that door, that small, unassuming door in the corner of the bedroom. What was behind it? What had I heard? The next morning, I went back to the apartment to pick up my things. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but when I got there, the host was waiting outside. She seemed a little concerned when she saw me. She asked if I had enjoyed my stay, and I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and smiled, feeling uncomfortable. When I mentioned the noise, her face shifted slightly. She told me the door had been there for years and that it was just a storage space, like she had said. Nothing behind it, she assured me. She offered to refund part of my stay, but I didn't want to talk about it anymore. I just wanted to leave. Before I left, I took one last look at the apartment. The bedroom door was still there, quietly closed. I wondered if anyone had ever asked about it before, or if I was the only one who'd heard anything. I felt like I was walking away from something that I didn't fully understand, something that wasn't right. As I drove away, I couldn't help but feel like I'd escaped from something, but I didn't know what. I didn't know if I would ever find out. But I knew one thing for sure. I would never stay in that apartment again. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway. After months of feeling burnt out from work and life in general, I thought I could really use a break. Some time alone, a little fresh air, and a bit of isolation to clear my head. I'd found this charming little cabin on Airbnb, tucked away in the woods about 2 hours from the city. The reviews were glowing, the photos looked perfect, and the price was right. It seemed like just what I needed, a cozy place to disconnect. The drive there had been beautiful. As I got further out of the city, the trees thickened, and the world seemed to quiet down. I was looking forward to stepping away from the noise of everyday life, but as I got closer to the cabin, a feeling of unease started to creep over me. The road was dirt and full of bumps, not a single other car in sight. The woods seemed a little too dense, the air too still. I tried to brush off the feeling, thinking it was just the change of scenery. When I arrived at the cabin, it was exactly as described. The outside had that rustic charm, with wood logs and a stone chimney. There was a little porch with a few chairs, and the whole place seemed to be isolated from everything else. No neighbors for miles. It looked perfect, but there was something off about it, something I couldn't quite place. The silence in the air was almost oppressive. I didn't want to let the feeling spoil my weekend, so I grabbed my bag and headed inside. The interior was cozy, exactly what I was expecting. The living room had a big stone fireplace, a couple of plush armchairs, and a window looking out over the woods. The kitchen was small but fully stocked. A few books were scattered on the coffee table, and the place had that welcoming, lived-in feeling that made me think I was really getting away from everything. It was clear the owner had put a lot of care into making the place feel comfortable. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the couch by the fire, trying to relax. But that feeling, the one I couldn't shake, lingered. The silence felt too heavy, the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful but unnerving, like everything was holding its breath. I glanced around the cabin, but there was nothing unusual about it. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. I chalked it up to the isolation, being surrounded by so many trees, and tried to push the discomfort aside. Maybe it was just the fact that I hadn't been this far from civilization in a long time. I decided to get some sleep early that night, thinking that a good rest would help me feel better. The bed was comfortable, the room dark and quiet, with just the soft glow of the moon coming through the windows. But sleep didn't come as easily as I hoped. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe an animal moving around outside. But then it became more distinct, soft, almost imperceptible whispers. I lay there, still as a statue, straining my ears, trying to figure out what it was. It sounded like someone was speaking just out of earshot, too quiet to understand but too clear to be imagined. I told myself it was just the wind, rustling through the trees, maybe brushing against the cabin. But the whispers persisted. I sat up in bed, my heart starting to pound. There was a chill in the room now, colder than before. The whispers grew louder, more defined. They weren't coming from outside, they were coming from inside the cabin. My mind raced. Was someone in the house? I could hear them shifting, murmuring low words I couldn't quite make out. I quickly glanced around the room. The door was locked. The windows were shut tight. There was no one there. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A draft, perhaps, or an animal in the walls. I got up to check the house, moving quietly through the cabin, my pulse quickening with every step. I searched the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom. Empty. There was no one around. I even checked the closet just to be sure. But still, I could hear the whispers, clearer now, almost like someone was standing just behind me. My skin crawled as I felt the cold touch of the air around me. But when I turned to look, there was no one there. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I felt trapped, stuck in a place where nothing made sense. The whispers continued to haunt me. Every time I thought they'd stop, they'd grow louder, as if something or someone was trying to communicate with me. But I couldn't make out the words. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Maybe there was a hidden speaker in the walls. Maybe the house had some old wiring, some old device that was malfunctioning. But none of that explained the strange feeling that was growing inside me, the sense that I wasn't alone. I picked up my phone and tried calling the host. Maybe they could help, or maybe they'd have an explanation. But there was no answer. I left a message, feeling the panic rise in my chest as the whispers continued, growing more insistent. The air in the room felt thicker now, harder to breathe. I didn't know what was happening, but I needed to get out of there. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, lying in bed with the blankets pulled tight around me. The whispers never stopped. They swirled around me, fading in and out, like they were coming from all directions. Every so often, I would hear something clearer, a word or two, but they didn't make sense. I couldn't even tell if they were real or if my mind was playing tricks on me in the dark. By the time the first light of dawn came through the window, I was packing my things. I couldn't stay another minute. My hands shook as I shoved my clothes into my bag, the whispers still lingering in my ears. I wanted to leave. I needed to leave. But the thought of walking out into the woods alone, in the dark, made my stomach twist with dread. The house felt like a trap, like the walls themselves were closing in around me. I kept checking the windows, the door, making sure no one was out there watching. When I finally made it to the door, I hesitated for a moment. I glanced back one last time at the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. The air outside was still, but the woods seemed to be holding their breath, too. I stepped out onto the porch, almost relieved to feel the cool air on my face. But when I looked back at the cabin, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the front door was a note. It was scrawled in messy handwriting, and it read, "Quiet and peaceful, always too quiet." I didn't know what it meant, but the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The whispers hadn't been my imagination. Someone had been in that cabin with me, and they had left the message for me. I didn't want to think about what it meant, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the first to feel that suffocating silence. I didn't wait to figure it out. I grabbed my bag and rushed to my car, my heart pounding in my chest as I drove away from that place. The road back to the city felt like the longest drive of my life. I kept looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something following me. But all I saw was the empty road behind me, the trees blurring past as I sped away from that cabin, from the whispers, from the oppressive, suffocating silence. When I finally made it back to the city, I felt a weight lift off my chest. I had made it out, but every time I thought about that note, about the whispers that had never stopped, I felt the chill creep back into my bones. The next day, I went back online to look at the listing for the cabin, hoping I could find some clue, some explanation. The listing was still up, the same glowing description, the same perfect photos. But as I scrolled through the reviews, one stood out. It was from a few months ago. The review was short, just a few lines, but it sent a chill down my spine. It said, "The cabin was peaceful, but there was something wrong. The silence was too thick, and the whispers didn't stop." I couldn't stay. I left early. I wasn't the only one who had felt it. Someone else had heard the whispers, too. I don't know who or what left that note on the door or what had been in those walls with me, but I do know that I'll never stay in another isolated cabin again.